Welcome to the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove. Today we're going to talk about the potential for water wars, the direct impacts of water scarcity on the world. We all know that clean water is essential for life, yet billions of people around the world don't have enough water. And global warming is making the problem worse, increasing the number of water-stressed areas and magnifying the water problems in regions already affected. Scientists with the United Nations report a 20% drop in renewable water resources for every 1 degree Celsius increase in global warming. So the world's current 1.5 degrees Celsius increase means we've already lost 30% of our renewable water resources. Subtropical regions like the southern United States, North Africa, Australia, they're suffering longer and more frequent droughts broken by torrential rainfalls that cause flooding. Water scarcity affects the world's food supplies, is a direct cause of mass migration, and a direct cause of geopolitical conflict, water wars. We're joined today on Zoom by Dr. Wendell Chris King, retired Brigadier General and Dean Emeritus of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. Dr. King holds a PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Tennessee and 2 master's degrees, a Master of Science in Civil Engineering and a Master of Arts in National Security and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College. He's a licensed professional engineer, board certified by the American Academy of Environmental Engineers, and is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, the American Academy of Environmental Engineering Honor Award for his work in Kuwait, and the Army Science Award for Outstanding Research in Geophysical Subsurface Remote Sensing. Dr. King is the author of 2 books, Understanding International Environmental Security, a Strategic Military Perspective, and Environmental Engineering, PE Examination Guide and Handbook. He's also the author of numerous scientific reports and journal articles. He's lectured at over 50 professional conferences, including the technical session of the Copenhagen Climate Summit in 2009, at Oxford University on water wars, and at NATO and OSCE programs on environmental security. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Bob. Good to see you again.
Well, you've
Thank
certainly
you for the
covered a lot of
invitation.
ground. Oh,
Yeah.
you're always welcome. You've certainly covered a lot of ground over your career. How did you get started with environmental security?
Yeah, I think that's important for the people to understand. When I lecture in person, oftentimes people are surprised to see a military officer, a senior military officer, talking about a subject like climate change. But it actually makes sense when we I tell a little story about my history of getting involved in this. Uh, In my Army career, I have been to over 58 countries, mostly doing work on either humanitarian operations, restoration after combat, or in periods of conflict. And one of the things I learned in my Naval War College studies is you're not really making any progress unless you're working towards a solution rather than just fighting the symptoms. So from the first time I was involved in an incident, uh, which was environmentally related, was in Middle Africa in the 1980s, and I was at headquarters Army Europe, and we were asked to go look at what the Army should do about a mass refugee movement out of Middle Africa into the Mediterranean area, and how the Army should get involved. The number of people is moving, uh, starving. Humanitarian operation was a big problem there. And we looked at it, and the Army solution was, we don't have a solution. We should not be involved in this exercise. We need to walk away from that. Uh, the next time I was involved in it was the humanitarian operation in Rwanda, where 1 million people had been moved from their country in Rwanda and had exited because of a genocide that was occurring in their country. More than 1 million people were killed in 100 days. And we had over 1 million people sitting in a place called Goma, Zaire, at that time, before the name was changed in Zaire. 5,000 people a day were dying from cholera and other diseases in this refugee camp. This time, the President of the United States made the decision to stop the dying. That was all we had as a directive, as a mission statement: stop the dying. I joined that mission on my birthday, That's how I remember. It was July 25th, 1994. Uh, and we gathered a small group of people in the Pentagon, and we started planning out a mission of what we were going to do to execute that mission. Uh, and one of the things that was most stark about it was, why were those people, after hundreds of years of living fairly quietly together, what was the source of the conflict? What was the big driver? Uh, and how are we going to do our immediate mission? But then how are we going to reconstitute it so that peace and stability could be reestablished? We spent about 150 days there feeding, cleaning the water. The main problem that was killing them was cholera, which is one of the least of the infectious diseases that you would worry about. We take shots, 20 shots when we go off to a place like Rwanda, and take the pills for malaria and all those things. We don't even worry about cholera because that shouldn't be a big killer. But when you have a million people that only have dirty water to drink, it is a killer. Those kinds of experience made me ask the question, why is all of this happening? What's going on? So my next job was as a professor at West Point. And I was looking for what I was going to do in my research past the geophysical work I had done for my PhD. And I found in the study of environmental security that had been going on for quite a while in places like the Ivy League schools, Oxford in England, places like that, Cambridge in England, were studying this thing called environmental security. And there were a lot of definitions of that. But I recognized what some of I had seen in these dire circumstances was related to environmental issues. Certainly Rwanda was dirty water. Other places, when you really dug down into it, it was the lack of being able to have the basic human needs met in a sustainable way. That's how I finally defined environmental security. I recognized it was not a new issue. People like Norman Myers from Oxford had been writing about it for a very long time. And my favorite quote of all the environmental security work, so I'm going to read this one to everybody. National security is not just about fighting forces and weaponry. It relates to watersheds, croplands, forests, genetic resources, climate, and other factors that rarely figure into the minds of military experts and political leaders. This was written by Norman Myers, published for work he had been doing throughout the 70s and 80s in The Environmentalist. That was published in 1986. This was not a new idea. It was just an idea that hadn't been well discussed, and it certainly hadn't been discussed in places like the Pentagon or the British staff officers' courses or places like that. The other quote I always use to recognize what I was getting into in 1993 and 1994 when I started environmental security study was a quote from B.H. Liddell Hart, who's a famous historian and strategist in the British military. The only thing harder than getting a new idea into the military mind is getting an old one out. And that was what I was facing in the 90s, trying to convince the Pentagon that environmental security needs to be one of those things that we consider when we look at the national security threats to the United States and to world peace and security. And that started what's now a 30-year war in trying to get a place in national security studies for environmental security and to start understanding the why. And that's the work I have been doing for a while. Now, we recognize that environmental security isn't just about climate. Just as Norman Myers wrote, it's about watersheds and croplands and food, forests, genetic resources. But today, as I look at it, climate change is probably the 800-pound gorilla in this event. It has the ability to do more harm more quickly than any of the other issues that we've got. So in the late 2000s, I joined a group called the Global Military Council for Climate Change. And we were devoted to try to convince military people around the world that climate change needs to be considered. It needs to be something we worry about. It's the why people are mass massively migrating from different places in the world, why conflict is occurring. So I have been doing those studies since. And in the last probably year, but definitely in the last 6 months, I have just decided to focus on water as a scarce resource, water as a critical resource around the world. I was seeing so much information coming out of different places in the world, including the United States, where water was getting to be more and more the limiting factor on a sustainable environment. And so that's what I've been studying for the last 6 or 7 months in great detail. So I've compiled the data of that's in open sources that are published in reputable places about places that are having conflict and having insecurity, instability, and mass migrations. We're going to discuss, I think, as we go on. One of the most critical will be from Mexico and how that's going to affect us directly. So that's my introduction to the thing. This is why an old colonel, now general, it was involved in that work, and how it kind of makes sense when you look at a 33-year military career plus 10 years of teaching with an environmental engineering background. So,
Indeed.
okay, what's up, Bob?
Yeah,
Let's
what's up? There's so much up, and you and I have
yeah.
talked about so many different topics over the year. I mean, climate related, but there is so many things. So I'm kind of curious, and you kind of hinted on this. You're really focusing on water. Why is water your top topic? I mean, why is that so important?
That first book that you mentioned,
Mhm.
uh, that was my conclusion out of that, which was more than 25 years ago. Of all the things that I looked at, air quality, warming, sea level rise, uh, increase in extreme weather, those kinds of things are all climate related problems. But the changes that are being made to water resources, watersheds, the availability of water was the most critical. Secondly, is uh, my experience is we are very busy as a human race in basically messing up our own water supplies. There's a tremendous increase in the contamination of water. People that had clean water before now have water that's contaminated. I moved back to Tennessee after my 45 years in the Army. And one of the things I noticed, streams that had been scenic rivers before were now almost open sewers. That was clean, usable water. And you look around the world, it's dramatic in places like Bangladesh. Uh, India has tremendous water resources, but so much of it's contaminated because of uncontrolled pollution into the rivers and their watersheds. So it's climate is denying, as you pointed out, we're losing maybe 20, 30% of the water, renewable water we had before. We're contaminating significant parts of that, and the population growth in many places in the world that far exceeded the capacity of the watershed in its previous state to even water those. And water is one of the things in the basic triad of the things you absolutely have to have for a sustainable environment. Water's the biggest. You got to have it to drink, and you got to have it to produce food. So
Absolutely.
water
Nothing
is
will
the
kill.
centerpiece of everything.
There you go. I attended a recent presentation you gave called Climate Change, Water Wars, and Other Scary Stuff. Yeah, that's a pretty strong opener. Why water wars?
Well, people like probably the Peter Glick is the guy I admire most in what he has done on compiling resources on water. And one of the things he studies is where are there places that actual conflict has occurred because of water. I mean, you can go back 2,000 years and find historical records of that.
Mhm.
But in recent times, the number of places there's actually been conflict, people have died fighting over water, has continued to grow more and more and more. Uh, the old Western adage in the United States was whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over.
Yeah,
Uh,
there you go.
and it has not gotten any better. We haven't learned anything, basics. And one of the things I looked at is uh, the Western United States and the places that are more and more challenged to being able to provide for the basic human needs, not even grow the food, but just meet the basic sustainable human needs for water. And there are more and more places, and uh, in our country and in the world. I've got a list of 20 major cities around the world that are running out of water right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's look at some of those different regions. Where do
Yeah,
you want to start? How about the Nile River Basin?
that's that's one of my favorites. You've seen me speak on that before, because even before climate change started affecting that region, uh, water was a critical resource. Uh, my research showed that uh, based on the growth of the countries that use the Nile as its primary source of water, uh, the population is more than doubling by 2050 in that region of the world, while the Nile is going to have less water than it had before. So what we have is, I can get the numbers exactly because that's one of my favorite. This is before climate change influences it. And climate change, by the way, as you would expect, is not going to make anything better there.
No.
But the best you can figure, and getting data about actually how much water's in the Nile on an annual basis is it's within maybe 20-30% error bounds, but there's about 140 billion cubic meters of water a year in the Nile River. That's today. It is going down now. Most of that water is generated in the middle of Africa, but most of the use are on those countries that are at the northern end of the Nile River. Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, now South Sudan, those countries use most of the water. The water use today is about 180 billion cubic meters. And what that means is, in our terms, as in water resources, they're mining water. They're taking groundwater and other sources of water and using more than the river is providing already. But if the population continues to grow as they're predicted, the needs are going to be for 350 billion cubic meters of water a year. And the water isn't there. The water is not even half that. There's not enough sources to mine water to keep up with that demand. So now look at what's going on in Sudan and South Sudan right now. They've been at war for like 20 years, fighting over critical resources. Egypt has stated publicly they will get all the water they need from the Nile, and they will do whatever they have to do to get that water. They have the biggest army in that region. There's a reason they have the biggest army in the region, because their national defense strategy demands that they be able to achieve that. While most of the water is generated in places like Ethiopia in the mountains there, and in the Central Africa areas, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, all of that water comes from there, but then it's the demand in Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan. Those are the fastest growing countries in there. Egypt's going to more than double their population by 2050, and it's already struggling to provide for food. It's a food importer, and without water, that's a critical, important thing for the United States national defense. Egypt has been kind of the only rock we've been able to stand on in the middle of that mess to ask to support, to try to build a peace. If it goes under, you wouldn't think it could get worse there, but it can. And water will be one of the pressures. I know if we could solve the water problem in Syria, Israel, Gaza, and the other countries in that region, we could take a lot of pressure off, because lands that have no value now because there's no water could serve as a place that could form a useful place for people to live and work and sustain themselves if we had water.
So you're seeing potential water conflict between Central Africa, water wars between Central Africa and Northern Africa, because there's not
Well,
enough water to feed everybody.
certainly we've seen serious saber rattling already between Egypt and Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is building dams on their parts of the Nile
I see.
to get multiple uses from it. They can have the water for their own use for their people with a growing population. They can water ground that does not now produce food for those people, they can create energy, generate hydro energy by putting dams on those in the mountains where that water is generated. Is that something Egypt wants or is going to allow? There is good news in this, though. They are
Mhm.
finally talking about, well, maybe we can share the water, share the energy, share and so it creates an opportunity for cooperation where everybody gets a win.
That would be
But
great.
that isn't happening every place. That's the problem. Uh, Trying to get an agreement between South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Gosh, that's very, very hard when you look at the political situation that exists today. And Ethiopia, I mean, not Ethiopia is one source, but a lot of that water comes out of South Sudan too. It certainly all flows through South Sudan. Not a drop of that water is generated in Egypt. The rainfall at Aswan, which is the centerpiece of water storage and the hydro domain for Egypt, the rainfall on an annual basis at Aswan is 0.00 inches per year.
Not a
It
lot.
is one of the driest places in the world and is
Mhm.
always that. So is North going to conflict with South for the water? They have to.
Well,
That's
hopefully
the
they can
only
work that
source for the
out.
water.
Yeah, exactly. So potential there, which kind of takes us over to China and the Tibetan Plateau. Talk about that. And they've
Yeah.
had their
Now,
water wars.
the the example over there is really important when you start thinking about climate change, because the primary driver for change over there is climate change, and it's the loss of the cryosphere over there, the snow and ice and glaciers that have existed for the last tens of thousands of years is the water supply for that part of the world. And those are rapidly melting and changing. How much snow and ice is stored, when it's released through the melting process in the summer, all of that is changing because of climate. And what makes this so critical, Bob, is first of all, there's about 3.5 billion people that are living off that one watershed. China, very high population. India, the second highest population. Bangladesh, Pakistan, and then of course we've got Vietnam and those other countries, Cambodia. All of those survive on that one watershed, and it's changing dramatically. Lots of runoff in the spring, and they're getting floods, and people are dying. Drier and drier in the summer when they're growing their crops and stuff. And so we have 3.5 billion people. Oh, by the way, you've got 7 of the 15 biggest armies in the world in the countries
In
that
that
are
region.
in that region. China and India are at war all the time. Nepal is under severe duress from pressure from China. Uh, I don't think they have any really dislike of the Dalai Lama. They just want all his water. Water is being diverted. The 7 of the major rivers in the world all come off of that and go into those countries I just mentioned. And when that gets destabilized and that water is not available, now we have billions of people looking for what do they do now that they cannot sustain themselves in the way they have before. And that's pretty scary. It's
It
even
is.
from a humanitarian operation standpoint, it's so scary.
So a lot of potential for conflict there and past conflict, obviously, the invasion of
Tremendous.
Tibet. Yeah.
Especially when you look at some of the stability of some of the governments, not China, not India, but some of the smaller countries. They're very, very, Myanmar, places like that are unstable, but with large armies and uh, they don't have a relationship with anybody. They're fighting inside their own countries as much as anything else. And we really need governance and very, very supportive long-term solutions in that part of the world. And those kind of governments
Yeah.
are not able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned earlier major urban areas. You have this whole list of places that are in water crisis. I mean, Bogota, Mexico City, places like that. What are you seeing there?
Well, each one's a different solution because they're usually driven by different problems. Uh, Mexico City is the scariest to me. There are people, good science, that are looking at it that expects Mexico City is going to go dry by August or September of this year.
This year. Wow.
This year. So yes, uh, it is the geography of that domain. There's first of all, there's 22 million people there. They live in this large bowl, and it's a geographic bowl where it's closed. There's no water coming in except what falls on that bowl. So they have been living off the surface water created by rainfall and the groundwater that's stored. And when we say they're getting ready to go dry, their reservoirs will be dry, and they have pumped all the groundwater they can out of their underground reservoir because there are so many people there, and the environment is just not able to produce the amount of water that 22 million people demand. So as an environmental security and a military person, I look at that and I see we have a terrible problem on our southern border already, an intractable problem, it seems, that we can't solve. And those people are not primarily Mexicans that are coming across the border. They're from Guatemala, El Salvador, Central American countries where I would propose that much of the problem that's driving them out are environmental security related. They're not able to produce the food that they need. And there is a safety issue too, because the gangs have taken over because the governments aren't able to provide the basic human needs of the people. But what happens now if 22 million people from Mexico City cannot be sustained where they live now? We think we got bad pressure right now when those people start migrating, and they're going to migrate north.
Exactly.
South is not an
no
option.
place else to go. Yeah.
South is not an option. And staying there will not be an option if they don't have water. If they don't have enough water, we're not even talking about the water to grow food, which is usually the highest demand of a region, is to be able to produce the food. But if they don't even have enough water for drinking, I've got, you've seen the videos and the pictures that I've got of people lining up around rusty barrels to get enough water to take to their house to cook their food and to have for drinking water. One of the big things I know is if that continues, we're going to have a humanitarian crisis because infectious disease gets into a population like that. It's biblical. When you have that much instability and insecurity, disease follows disaster just like night follows day.
You're listening to the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove. We're speaking with Dr. Wendell Chris King about the impacts of water scarcity. So obviously potential for, we already have border immigration issues, migration such, but this Mexico City water crisis later this year, you say could be driving millions of people north. So pretty big deal.
That was a really reputable engineering study, science study. Not fake news, not fake news.
No, not at all. How about here in the United States? What's happening with the Colorado River?
Oh, that's a big interest. That's really what kicked off me studying these things. In 1 month, I got 105 articles about water scarcity, water conflicts, water problems just in the United States. And I said, that's what drove me to say, I need to dig into this more. I need to see what's there. I need to see if this is real. Are they isolated? Why? I'm back to answer your question why, because I can't fix it until I know why it's occurring. And the Colorado River is the one that has gotten the most attention. It's gotten the most attention because Lake Mead got within a few feet of going dry, basically. It still had water, but water that couldn't be recovered. It was below the last intake on the river. So it not only wouldn't provide water, it would not be providing the hydropower and the other uses that are made of that water. It would not be feeding the downstream needs of the million people that live below the dam. And so there's several apps that provide you the daily height of the water in Lake Mead and other places in the Colorado, Lake Powell, which is the next one up that feeds Lake Mead. There's good news and there's bad news here, Bob. We've had a tremendous amount of water in that region of the world with the snow and then those huge rainstorms, which of course flooded everything out and was dangerous and hurt people and destroyed property. But a lot of that water collected up in the Colorado River Basin and is feeding Powell and Meade, and the water is rising. Here's the problem. It's still 200 feet below its full level. After all of that water and that tremendous amount of rainfall and snowfall that we've got and that it's melting off, it only raised the level about 70 feet. So the storage capacity is still a threat in Meade and Powell. It won't be this year. It's delayed the problem. But the Colorado, even over into Colorado and in the headwaters, that's one of the other parts of the story, is they're looking at how they're going to balance it in the upper riparian regions. And the only solution they have is to take significant amounts of the agricultural land out of use. They need to take 25,000, more than 25,000 acres out of use right now to get to the water coming in equals the water that's being used in those agricultural uses. Now the question is, who has to quit farming? Who loses their livelihood if you need thousands and thousands of acres to quit being used for farm? Who makes the decision? Who gets that? And who? Those are really, really
Those
hard
are tough
problems.
questions. Yeah. Yeah.
They're doing the same thing in Texas. Texas is having to take land out of use because basic human needs are bigger than the requirements for agriculture in that particular place.
Yeah. Let's connect
Um,
some of these dots if we can. I mean, we're
yeah,
talking
let's
about
try.
the United States, Mexico, North Africa, the Tibetan Plateau. I mean, let's talk about the Colorado. It ran. I mean, traditionally, it ran into Mexico. I mean, that water all went down and fed northern Mexico. I know the U.S. built a dam around 1950, whatever, and diverted all that water to California. Entered into a treaty with Mexico, the Mexican Water Treaty, where the
Yeah,
U.S. committed to release, what, 1.5 million acre feet of water to Mexico annually. Okay,
annually,
so we
yes.
got a treaty annually. But 2022, Mexico's water got cut 5%. In 2023, it got cut 7%. It's like that resource is dwindling. I mean, we talk about Central Africa and Egypt and stuff, potential for water wars there. We see China invading the Tibet Plateau for water there.
Yeah.
Are we looking at a U.S. Mexican water war?
No, they don't have the capacity to. We're unilaterally doing those things and telling them tough.
So
Not
there's no war
even
just because
like
we're the bigger gorilla on the
we're
field.
they look at us just like Nepal looks at China, a hideous, wrong bully. And you know what? They're right. Uh, that's one of the scary things about my military service. Towards the end, I wondered sometimes whether we were. I always felt as a young officer and stuff, uh, being involved in military and defense, and uh, you want to at least feel like you're the good guy. And I know in the way we're dealing with Mexico, the way we feel we have to deal with Mexico, we're not the good guy. We're the bad guy. We unilaterally decided they can't have that water because we need it more. And I don't know that that's right. I really don't know that that's assured, but they do not have the capacity to. They've got so much internal conflict caused by things that are environmental security driven, like Mexico City and some of the things in the southern parts of their country that we just know we can get away with it. But that doesn't feel good to me as far as the way America has or the America I knew and grew up with was to be thought of. We wanted to be considered that we were the good guys. And uh, in this particular instance, in the example you just gave, you were factual in the thing, but it doesn't feel good to me.
Sure. Sure. We being strategic about this. I mean, obviously, we're describing a situation where we're not giving the water to Mexico and we're looking at potential mass migration, putting pressure on our border.
Yeah.
would releasing more water to Mexico alleviate the migration issue and help us there? I mean, is there a balance we can achieve?
Not, the one that we have right now probably isn't heavily driven by the Mexican relation, because as I pointed
Because
out,
it is
all of
Central
those are
America, right?
migrating from Central America that are coming up. But would it help if we could get water in some way so that they would have more resources for the people in Mexico City and other places that
Mhm.
they have critical need, grow food for those people, and save more of the water in that basin for just human, it gives them solutions. It gives
Yes.
them some ways to think about the problem where right now it doesn't. One other thing I would point out, the Rio Grande is another one that we have those same kind of relationships with. But both the Colorado and the Rio Grande, those are not clean waters when they go to Mexico. You know me. I'm in irony and I'm a little bit of sarcastic. And I said, look, that's the perfect water for them for agriculture. It's already got fertilizer in it. It's already got pesticides in it. It's already green and everything, so it grows anything. That's the state of the thing. It's not only that the quantity needs to be there, but it's got to be cleaner. Because cleaning water for the kinds of things that we're discharging now in our country, and certainly with it, by the time it goes through all those uses that it has made, that water has been used 6 or 7 times between agriculture, stormwater runoff and stuff. And by the time it gets to those borders, it's not enough and it's not clean. And
Mm.
those are the the issue we seem to spend our time on is the quantity of water, but we in this country are ignoring
The
significant
quality.
issues with the qualities of what we've got and what we drink,
Mhm.
and certainly what's in the streams that have been water sources before for us that are no longer usable for those kind of use for human uses without
Right.
extreme amounts of technology applied to clean them, which makes them more.
Filtering and such. Yeah,
We do know how
absolutely.
to take the dirtiest water in the world and make it drinkable. One thing is usually expensive, and the other part is people sort of kind of don't want to drink water that's been sewage. I don't know that
Well, that may have to change. I mean, the world is
that may have
changing.
to change. You're seeing more and more little pilot plants of reclamation of water popping up. We just
Absolutely.
built one here in
I
Franklin,
think,
Tennessee.
yeah, I think that's one of the solutions. We'll have to talk about that. You
Yeah,
mentioned releasing more water to Mexico, so it would alleviate the food crisis and such.
yeah,
Let's jump over to Russia. Ukrainians kind of known as the regional breadbasket.
it
How much
is.
of the how much of the Russian invasion had to do with water and food?
I think that a significant part of it is the food.
Mhm.
It is the breadbasket. It is just tremendous. I mean, uh, one of the parts of the strategy is trying to deny them the ability to ship the wheat that they grow every year there, denying them the money that produces for the Ukraine. Oh, by the way, would Russia like to have that in their economy as opposed to in the Ukrainian economy? One of the things that they like to do is strip resources away from a country so that they have to be subservient to the Russian government. So if
Mhm.
they now control all that money from both the energy, the water resources that they have, the energy that they produce with that water resources, it's economics as well as it is political. In fact, it is more economics than anything else.
Yeah.
It is having those resources just like water. When I talk about water, once you're out of it, what are your choices? Fight or flight?
Mhm. Either become a refugee or start a war.
Start a war or
Mhm.
be taken over by the country that's trying to get the resources
That's
and
it.
it's becoming subservient to them. And you see tenets of that in all of these little conflicts that are around. Certainly Russia, Ukraine. Uh, it's not a political issue. It's much more that and economics and uh, their ability to grow large amounts of food and feed large amounts of population, I think is one of the significant things about Ukraine. I've visited there a couple of times doing military work. Uh, and well, one of the thing is one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been in as far as the architecture and the land and stuff. It is a very, very beautiful country. Uh, and uh, a proud people. And of course, we found out that when they had to defend themselves. I'm sure Russia thought they would just very quickly uh, throw up their hands and not extend the conflict in any way. Boy, they were wrong about that one. I think we were all
Yes.
wrong about that one. I'm not a military strategist and know that much about it, but having visited the people and stuff like that, uh, I wasn't sure that would be the outcome. But uh, they're a strong, good people, I think, and it's their country and they want to keep it. But it is a critical resource that they're fighting over.
Yes, it is. You call that a little conflict. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, you probably read this, they recently issued an enforcement alert warning about increased cyber attacks against water utilities across the U.S. They cited recent attacks by an Iranian-linked group on Pennsylvania water supplies, Russian-linked activists attacking Texas utilities, and a Chinese-sponsored group targeting utilities across the U.S.
Yeah.
Those seem like little conflicts there, but any thoughts on that? I mean, it seems to be becoming a bigger, more prevalent problem for us.
Well, it's one you can do without ever leaving your desk and your computer. Uh, it's the easiest form of terrorism you can think about it. Uh, we have the people that are capable of doing that, and I'm sure we are uh, not without studies or activities associated with doing that. Our primary focus is securing our systems and stuff, but they weren't built to be secure. Uh, the World Wide Web and the interconnectivity of everything has assured that, so that if you want a guy sitting at his desk to be able to turn a valve to make a system run, well, then somebody can turn it off, or somebody can probably put something in there that would destroy the software that runs the whole system. If some one person has access to that, they can break through that. We've seen that in our personal lives, people stealing your identities, finding ways to get into the economic systems to steal money and steal other things. So it's the easiest form of terrorism. Almost everybody in the world is capable of doing it. It just takes a couple of smart guys. The guys are women and men. It's not limited at all. Uh, it's a scary, scary thing how you defend yourself from that. But what are you going to attack? You're going to attack what is the biggest vulnerability, and it's back to the same thing we started with. Can you
Water.
deny people basic human needs? If you do that, that's the worst thing you can do for them.
So we're talking about remote control valves, valves that control the flow of water, control the flow of chemicals into the water.
Yes,
So
all of
if a
it.
hacker gets hold of those, they can not only turn your water off, turn your sewage on and off, they can mix the two of them together.
They
So
can hyperchlorate the water. They can dump massive amounts of fluoride in, because most public water systems add just a little fluoride for the dental caries issues. Uh, if you get about 10 parts per million fluoride in the water, that's fairly toxic.
yeah,
It has a detrimental effect. I once did a study on one of the Army bases that naturally had 10 to 12 parts per million fluoride in the natural groundwater that they were pumping up. And we had to take that out and get it back down to a reasonable level, which is usually less than one. So if you turn the valve that said dump all the fluoride in the tank into the water, that's an immediate threat.
yeah.
They don't even have
Um,
to get there. And we used to do security analysis and studies. And when I was teaching, we'd have the cadets do that kind of study at West Point. And the thing we found most vulnerable was our water supply. If you wanted to attack our installation, go after the water supply. And that at the time, we were assuming somebody had to physically get there and get to the water supply. Now you don't even have to do that. You just have to have your computer and get into this system that operates the water treatment system or the water supply system. Turn the valves and drain the reservoir that stores the water, stuff like that.
yeah, yeah. Big scary stuff. So there's your water wars. Last year, the UN released their World Water Development Report. I assume you've seen that.
Yes, I
Um,
have.
yeah, they basically said 26% of the world's population is without drinking water, and 46% of the world without safe sanitation. I mean,
Yeah.
those are, I mean, a quarter, 50%. That's massive numbers. And their report expects the problem for urban populations to double in the next 20 years. So very much that's reinforcing what you said. Their conclusion was that the world is at imminent risk, and this is a quote, imminent risk of global water crisis if international cooperation is not boosted. What kind of
Yes.
cooperation are they talking about?
It's about sharing solutions. The easiest solution for everybody is developing water uh, management tools. Reducing the demand per capita is the first and immediate significant thing that we can do. The towns we're talking about, Sydney, Melbourne, Cape Town, Istanbul, in Turkey, Santiago in Chile, one of my favorite places I ever visited, Singapore, Delhi, Beijing, Jerusalem, Dubai, Barcelona, Rome, Denver, San Diego, Phoenix, Baltimore, San Francisco. All of those major metropolitan areas are the people we're talking about. And the little towns outside in countries that are developing countries, uh, nearly every city there has significant problems associated with that. Reduce the amount of water per capita, sharing the way that the critical resources are managed. It is all of those things that our solution takes into account the solution that Mexico needs. Our solution takes into account that Canada needs. Uh, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and China finding a way to manage the resources in a way that everybody uh, gets what they need. The water there, if we used it better and we managed it more carefully, it'll meet the sustainment needs for right now. If the population keeps growing, maybe that's not true. I don't know. But we have to start with the things that we can do immediately. It takes 20 years to build a dam, except in China, apparently. They can do it a lot faster. They can. They did it a lot faster than that in the major dams they put up recently. But in the United States, it took us 20 years to put up a major water resource event like a dam and stuff. We can't wait for that. We're past the critical point for that. So
Yeah,
we've got to have solutions that maybe everybody in Phoenix doesn't need a green lawn.
sure, sure. There are those things.
Just as an
The
example of the many things that
exactly.
are available to us in water management, changing agricultural uses that save the amount of water per pound of food that we grow. Those kinds of things everybody can do, and everybody, even if they're in Guatemala and they're growing cantaloupes that I love, ways to reduce the water for me to get that cantaloupe. Maybe not even grow it there anymore because it costs too much in water resources to ship it to me. Those kinds of things, Bob. And that's
Yeah,
an international cooperation.
yeah. I think the FOA, that's the Food and Agricultural Organization with the United Nations, they talk a lot about that, improving agricultural practices, better irrigation technology, and shifting to those less water intensive foods you're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the numbers that always sticks in my head is that it takes 1,100 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk.
Yeah.
If we drank the water instead of the milk, that would be a major impact. I'm wondering, and we see the same thing in foods. I mean, what, 35, 36 gallons of water produce a pound of vegetables compared to over 1,800 gallons of water to produce a pound of beef.
Yes.
So, we got that basic question of, eating more veggies, less meat to also help with this crisis as well as other things. How much of this, I mean, how much of the solution do you think is individual action, grassroots, whatever, us making changes in our diets, us voting for various things
Well,
versus the larger geopolitical solutions?
yeah. Uh, it's a significant percent, but I don't know what it is. I've seen lots of people have tried to figure that one out. Is it 20, 30% just what we could do individually? Uh, I think it's something that at least that big without getting into the the way corporations and states and stuff such as that were. But yeah, it's, the biggest crop that we grow in America is grass. That's been calculated. The more fertilizers, the more water uh, from everything that is grown goes onto lawns than anything else. Lawns at buildings, lawns in my backyard. I don't water my backyard, by the way. If it gets dry in the summer, there it is. It comes back in the spring and looks great. But those kinds of issues, what do you think? I've seen numbers from 10 to some people saying 40, 50%.
I
When you
see
think
the
about
same
America,
numbers.
for sure.
Yeah, certainly in the richer countries like America. I mean,
Yeah.
we obviously consume resources at I see 16 times, say, a Chinese versus individual American. We're consuming resources at 16 times the rate of China. So yeah, I think it's pretty significant what we can do with our diets, our yards, landscaping, not only reducing water consumption, but impacting our health, revenues from health work, gross domestic product.
Well, and
You've
when I'm
got
talking about the quality of the water that
and
we
the
put in,
quality of the water,
there
the
was a
quality of
significant,
life.
you want to see something that really contaminates the groundwater and the surface water, it's a golf course. They
Hmm.
put so much chemical on there to make it so bright and green and the greens and keep
Absolutely.
kill the pests and stuff like that. Unless that's controlled, and they're getting better and better at it, but it's the
Still.
truth. It's still a significant thing on the quality and the quantity of water.
Well,
Now
and here you are. You're from Kentucky, the land of Kentucky bluegrass.
I'm from Tennessee. We
Tennessee,
don't
excuse
claim it,
me.
but we do
We
have
don't.
the Kentucky bluegrass, but and
Yeah.
it loves water. It has to
Yeah.
have the water.
So
There's 10.
a lot of things we can do as individuals. What do you think we as, and I'm speaking to our listeners here, what do you think we as individuals can do on the larger scope in terms of addressing some of these geopolitical things? How do we act at a grassroots level to address these issues?
Yeah, we need to. Uh,
Is that voting? Is that running for office? Is that, I mean,
We need to
I don't,
promote leadership is what we need. We
okay.
need to promote people who will be leaders to get to the solutions of these kinds of things. You don't have to do it yourself, but somebody out there listening to you should be thinking about nobody else will do that. It ought to be me because I believe in this enough to recognize that, especially you younger folks. I give graduation speeches every once in a while. I did Kansas State, and one of the things I told people there, the young people that were getting their masters and PhDs at Kansas State, where water's critical. You and I live there. Water is absolutely critical to that state. I said, you have got to take charge. You have got to go out and lead. Otherwise, you're leaving it to my generation again. And look what a hell of a mess we have made of this thing. I got a lot of yeah from the audience on that one. But yes, we need these young people to know it's their future we're talking about now, and they need to
Mhm.
assure that we have the right kind of leadership. And however their personal abilities lead them, then they need to step up and do that. Be
Yeah.
the leader, or at least be one of the strong followers who say these are the standards, these are the what we're going to try to achieve as our generation.
Mhm.
I believe in them. They're talented, they're competent people, but the system doesn't support them.
Yeah. Yeah. They need our help and they need to stand up and take that leadership role. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Let's bring this back around. I mean, obviously, you've had a long, illustrious military career. You mentioned that you're a founding member of the Global Military Advisory Council on Climate Change. So bring it back around to the military. What's the military's role in solving the water crisis?
Well, first we do the things I was talking about. We were talking about individuals do it on our post camps and stations and set an example to show that those things can be done. They're not arduous. They don't destroy your life. You're not going to a miserable existence because you save water, you do good recycling, you reduce your footprint in the carbon way. Some of the examples doing what we do in a much better fashion actually ends up cheaper and better than the old ways we were doing it. The amount of fuel we use, the amount of waste we generate in our maintenance and base operations. There's tremendous opportunities for us to save a lot of money. It turns out you can save a lot of money if you don't buy it, you don't tear it up, you don't throw it away. The worst thing you can have is a whole bunch of hazardous waste left over from an activity, whether it's uh, motor maintenance on a big tank or whatever it happens to be. That's gallons and gallons and gallons of stuff that we have to drain out of every one of those vehicles. Being able to do all of that in a much more environmentally sensitive way. The biggest consumer of fuel, individual consumer of fuel in the United States is the United States airports, flying their jets, lots and lots of jets. Even bigger than that. Now, commercial airlines overall, if you put Delta, American, and all those together, are bigger than the United States airport. But the one individual organization that uses the most. So there's great opportunities to answer your question there. And I think the military is trying. The first roadmap we had on responding to climate change was put out in the 1990s. It addressed those kind of internal kinds of things that we could do. The problem is you have to invest money to get that return on investment. And the budgets haven't been built to invest in 5 years or 10 years. The military lives on a budget 1 year at a time. We call it operation and maintenance budget. So, and the goal is to spend every dime every year, or you don't get as much the next year. We need to change those kind of strategies in the way we do our business as a government. If you can save money, if you can invest now and get return on that 2 or 3 or 4 times, we got to have systems that allow us to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris, for joining us today. And I want to thank our listeners. We welcome your questions and feedback. You can learn more about the Climate Hour at climatehour.net. That's climatehour.net. This is the Climate Hour. I'm your host, Bob Grove.